Hello there, I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Welcome to World Panorama, where you get a complete roundup of all the big international news stories this week. First up, the headlines. Investigations continue in attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says terrorists who could initiate another round of bombings on government's radar. Also acknowledges major lapses to prevent attacks despite intelligence warnings from India. Government lowers the death toll to 253. Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un hold first summit. Russia says Pyongyang needs security guarantees to denuclearize. Kim accuses the US of acting in bad faith during summit earlier this year with President Donald Trump. Hong Kong sentences leaders of 2014 democracy protests. Court hands down prison sentences of up to 16 months to 8 leaders on public nuisance offences. Rights activists call sentences as unusually hard amid pressure from Beijing. Egyptian voters approve amendments to allow President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to remain in power until 2030. 88.8% of those who took part endorsed the proposals. Critics say changes will cement Sisi's authoritarian rule. And more than a month after Christchurch mosque attacks, the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern spearheads a push to combat violent extremism and terrorism on social media. The top story this week: investigations are continuing into coordinated attacks on 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. Now, many of the arrested people have suspected links to local Islamist extremist group NTJ. However, it was the Islamic State group that has claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that the threat of attacks is not over and that sleeper terrorists could initiate another round of bombings and that they are on government's radar. The government has also lowered the death toll to 253 from an earlier figure of 359.
Police officials and forensic experts sifting through the wreckage at the St. Sebastian Church in Nogombo, searching for evidence. This was one of the churches that was targeted in coordinated bomb attacks on Sunday. The near-simultaneous attacks targeted 3 churches packed for Easter services and 3 major hotels in the capital, Colombo. An attack on the 4th hotel on Sunday was foiled. The first mass funeral for the victims was held on Tuesday.
It was very difficult to find the bodies also. I had to spend nearly 10 hours to find the total bodies. In our family, we have 4 members who were attacked by the bomb.
Meanwhile, details are emerging of a band of 9 well-educated Islamist suicide bombers, including a woman from well-to-do families who slaughtered people in bomb attacks. Surveillance video emerged of 2 suspects entering Colombo's Shangri-La Hotel on Easter Sunday before series of blasts hit targets across the country. The Islamic State militant group claimed responsibility for the attacks, though Sri Lanka's government earlier blamed the blasts on local Islamist group NTJ. Political fallout of the attacks also continue. Sri Lanka admitted a major intelligence lapse, saying that an Indian intelligence warning from the beginning of the month about planned attacks was not properly shared by the authorities. Reports say the Indian tip-off had been received on 4th of April, but both President Maithripala Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe did not receive it. The country's Defence Secretary and Inspector General of Police were sacked.
Well, there was definitely a lapse of intelligence, and the government has, we have to take responsibility because unfortunately, if the sharing of intelligence information had been given to the right people, I think at least this could have been whether it could be avoided or even minimized.
Sri Lankan opposition lawmakers allege intelligence warnings were ignored for political reasons.
Obviously, the imminent attack was known to these people, right? And for whatever the reasons may be mystery. For me, it's political. I think it's political reason. They thought that you should not antagonize some of these Muslim leaders because of their vote base. And the country had to pay the price. Innocent civilians had to pay the price.
Meanwhile, blasted Sri Lanka is struggling to recover. A state of emergency remains in effect. Locals employed in the tourism sector fear that tourists who have been flocking to the Indian Ocean island could cancel in droves. A US State Department travel advisory warned of danger of terrorist groups plotting more attacks. Other governments, including Japan and Australia, have also cautioned citizens planning travel to Sri Lanka.
It makes you feel unsafe, like you have to be looking behind your back, something else could happen. So it's quite scary.
Pope Francis, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres joined world leaders like US President Donald Trump, UK Prime Minister Theresa May in offering their condolences. India expressed solidarity with Sri Lanka, President Ramnath Kovind and Vice President Venkaiah Naidu tweeting support. Prime Minister Modi also spoke to the Sri Lankan President and the Prime Minister to convey his condolences. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj also held a conversation with her Lankan counterpart. Several prominent international monuments, including the Eiffel Tower, were dimmed or lit in Sri Lanka's colours in solidarity. Sri Lanka still remains tense, with police looking for suspects and possible further explosives. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Vladivostok to hold talks for the first time ever on Thursday. Putin said that he and Kim discussed denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, sanctions, and the United States at their summit. Both the leaders expressed confidence that the summit will help assess the Korean Peninsula issues and boost bilateral ties. However, Putin says that Kim Jong-un needs international security guarantees if he is to end his nuclear program, and that such guarantees would need to be offered within a multinational framework. The meeting followed the breakdown of talks between the US and North Korea in February this year.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un laying flowers at the Navy Memorial in Russia's Pacific port city of Vladivostok. The sun shone briefly as Kim laid reed at S-56 submarine memorial along with local officials. This comes a day after his summit with President Vladimir Putin. During the meet, the two leaders had an in-depth discussion on ways for the countries to promote strategic communication and tactical collaboration in the course of ensuring peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and in the region.
We welcome your efforts to develop the inter-Korean dialogues and normalize North Korean-US relationship.
However, Kim accused the US of acting in bad faith during the summit earlier this year with President Donald Trump. He said the situation on the Korean Peninsula and the region is now at standstill and has reached a critical point. He asserted that peace in Korean Peninsula would depend entirely on Washington. It's noteworthy that negotiations between the US and North Korea had broken down during a summit in Vietnam in February, with no deal reached about North Korea's nuclear weapons.
This meeting will be very useful in strengthening and developing relationship between the two countries that share long history of friendship and traditions.
However, President Putin attempted to act as arbiter, saying Kim needed international security guarantees if he was to end his nuclear program. Kremlin says the six-party talks on North Korea, which are currently stalled, are the only efficient way of addressing the issue of nuclear weapons on the peninsula. Those talks, which began in 2003, involved the two Koreas as well as China, Japan, Russia and the US. After the talks, President Putin also accepted an invitation to visit North Korea. The visit is reported to take place as Kim's Russia's visit is being viewed as an opportunity for North Korea to show it has powerful allies following the breakdown of talks with the US. The summit is also an opportunity for Pyongyang to show that its economic future doesn't solely depend on US and for Russia to show that it is an important player in Korean Peninsula. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
8 Hong Kong activists were handed sentences of up to 16 months in prison on Wednesday for their roles in organizing pro-democracy demonstrations in 2014. The activists were convicted on charges of public nuisance and incitement 2 weeks ago, a verdict that some perceived as underscoring eroding political freedoms in Hong Kong under pressure from Beijing. The movement had demanded Hong Kong's 5 million voters be given the right to choose their leader of the semi-autonomous Chinese territory. Anger in Hong Kong as its pro-democracy protest leaders were sentenced on Wednesday. 2 of them jailed for 16 months. 4 others received suspended sentences, while 1 had his sentencing deferred until June. Arriving outside the court for sentencing, the 9 defendants, who included a law professor, 2 lawmakers and former student activists, shouted slogans in favor of universal suffrage and civil disobedience. Several hundred supporters, many wearing yellow bands and holding bright yellow umbrellas, also gathered outside the West Kowloon Law Court.
Now, in the verdicts, the judge commented we are naive, believing that by having an Occupy movement that we can attain democracy. But what else is more naive than believing in one country, 2 systems?
The sentencing comes 5 years after the protests rocked the China-ruled city. The umbrella movement leaders had in 2014 organized 79 days of pro-democracy protests. The group wanted Hong Kong voters to have the right to choose the city's leader. The demonstrations blocked roads in 3 important districts, Admiralty, Causeway Bay and Mong Kok, and drew more than 1 million people over nearly 3 months. The protests were the largest civil disobedience movement in the city's history. District Court Judge Johnny Chan, while handing down sentences, said that none of the defendants expressed any regret. Defendants are rather unfazed. They say Hong Kong's struggle to get to democracy will continue.
I'm happy and have hope today because of this last gathering. It gives me hope because we found strength here. The Hong Kong people will not give up for the fight of democracy. And I really believe when I release from prison, I will see a stronger and more powerful democratic movement in Hong Kong.
The group were found guilty earlier this month on rarely used colonial-era public nuisance charges for their roles in the 2014 protests. The trial was slammed by critics, saying that it highlighted shrinking political freedoms in the former British colony. Rights NGOs raised concerns about a chilling effect and the use of archaic laws to stifle dissent. However, China has rubbished the allegations, saying that everything was done according to the laws.
China formally supports the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government to punish, according to the law. I also want to remind the people from other countries who have one-sided understanding that the verdict was indicative for shrinking freedoms in Hong Kong, that their view is illogical and baseless.
It is noteworthy that in 1997, the long-time British colony of Hong Kong was handed over to China with the understanding that it would retain relative autonomy under the concept of one country, 2 systems. Umbrella protesters accused the Chinese government of breaking its promise to allow full democracy in Hong Kong and of encroaching more and more in the region. There was further dissent in Hong Kong this month again, after Hong Kong lawmakers put forward a controversial extradition bill that will allow fugitives to be transferred to mainland China to stand trial. stoking further concerns of declining legal protections in the city. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Egyptian voters have overwhelmingly backed constitutional changes, allowing President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to remain in power until 2030. The amendments, which were approved by Egypt's parliament last week, will extend al-Sisi's current term to 6 years from 4 and allow him to run again for another 6-year term in 2024. Al-Sisi thanked the Egyptian people for the vote, but critics say that the changes have placed the country on a path to more autocratic rule. The European Union also called on Egypt to adhere to the rule of law after the referendum.
Nearly 90% of Egyptian voters have backed constitutional changes that could see President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi stay in power until 2030. They made their voices known in a referendum which was held for 3 days, 20th to 22nd of April. Egypt's Election Commission announced the results on Tuesday, saying 88.83% of voters had approved the reforms, though the turnout was only 44.3%.
The number of those approving the constitutional amendments were more than 23.4 million voters, representing 88.83%. The number of those disapproving the constitutional amendments represent 11.17%.
The result means that Sisi's second term has been extended from 4 to 6 years, and he will be allowed to seek one more term in 2024. The 3-day referendum was called after Egypt's parliament overwhelmingly endorsed the proposals, which would also bolster the role of the military and expand the president's power over judicial appointments. Sisi's supporters argue that he has stabilized the country. With the economy improving, they say Sisi deserves more time to build on reforms.
I'm here for the new changes. President el-Sisi put in a lot of effort, and we must see his accomplishments. He is a respectful man, and the situation is very stable. People are happy.
Al-Sisi thanked voters in a Twitter message, saying they dazzle the world with their national awareness of the challenges facing our dear Egypt. He added that the referendum will be recorded with pride in the history of our great nation. But the vote was marred by claims of vote buying, with activists posting pictures on social media purported to show white cardboard boxes packed with groceries handed out to people after they voted. Critics also point at the turnout of referendum at only 44%, saying it shows Sisi's declining popularity, considering that he was re-elected last year with 97% of the votes. Critics also say the constitutional changes will stifle debate.
I do not agree to constitutional amendments to prolong the presidential term to 6 years. We had done a referendum before and agreed that it should be 4 years. So I do not agree that it should be 6 years.
Since early April, the Egyptian capital had been awash with large posters and banners encouraging people to vote in favor of the changes. However, the referendum is widely seen as another step towards restoring authoritarian rule 8 years after a pro-democracy uprising that toppled autocratic President Hosni Mubarak. El-Sisi, a former army general, was elected president in 2014 after Mohamed Morsi, Egypt's first civilian democratically elected president, was toppled in a coup the previous year. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. Former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn walked out of a Japanese jail for a second time since his arrest last year on financial misconduct charges. This after he posted a $4.5 million bail on Thursday and agreeing to curbs on contacting his wife. Ghosn has been charged with enriching himself at a cost of $5 million to Nissan, temporarily transferring personal financial losses to his employer's books, and understating his salary during his time at the helm of Japan's number 2 automaker. He has denied all the charges. Ukraine has said that it was simply illegal for Russia to make it easier for the residents of Ukrainian rebel regions to receive Russian passports. During a hastily called meeting on the matter inside the United Nations Security Council on Thursday, Ukraine's ambassador to the UN said that the decision was to tear away the Russian-occupied territories from Ukraine. Remember, Russian President Vladimir Putin had signed an order on Wednesday saying that the residents of Donetsk and Luhansk region of Ukraine were entitled to apply for Russian citizenship under an expedited procedure to be processed within 3 months. Rescue workers are digging through collapsed buildings along South Africa's eastern coast, where at least 60 people were killed when heavy rains caused flooding and mudslides. Hundreds of people have been displaced, mainly in the port city of Durban in KwaZulu-Natal province. Footage from local television showed multiple dwellings collapsed in the mudslides. President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the affected communities in KwaZulu-Natal area and told the survivors that he would ensure that all their needs are addressed in every way possible. And the second Belt and Road Forum began on Thursday in Beijing. It will serve as a stock-taking exercise for China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, which has come to dominate the country's foreign policy over the last 5 years. The BRI is made up of a belt of overland routes and a maritime road connecting Southeast Asia to Eastern Europe and Africa. President Xi Jinping delivered the keynote address in the presence of 37 heads of state or government and 5,000 representatives from 150 countries. While the United States has sent lower-level delegates, India has once again given the forum a miss. And in the wake of Christchurch attacks in which the lone gunman live-streamed the massacre, New Zealand and France will bring together global leaders at a summit next month to stop social media being used to organize and promote terrorism. Political leaders and tech company executives have been called to a meeting to be co-chaired by New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris on 15th of May. Now, they will be asked to commit to a pledge called the Christchurch Call, designed to eliminate the terrorist and violent extremist content online.
It was an attack that New Zealanders say changed them. Christchurch attack, in which a gunman killed 50 people at 2 mosques in the city. Apart from a complete overhaul of the gun laws, New Zealand also learnt the perils of social media. The gunman live-streamed the massacre as he went on shooting people, and the video was repeatedly shared online. Though it was taken down later, it was shocking how social media was used in an unprecedented way as a tool to promote an act of terrorism and hate. Now, New Zealand and France are leading efforts to stop the use of social media to organize and promote terrorism.
That alongside President Emmanuel Macron, we will be co-hosting a meeting in Paris in mid-May in response to the way in which the internet, in particular online platforms, were used during the 15th March terrorist attack.
The meeting in Paris on 15th of May will seek to have world leaders and CEOs of tech companies agree to a pledge called the Christchurch Call to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online. New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern says she had already spoken to a handful of social media chief executives about the pledge, including Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg. The meeting will be held in Paris alongside the Tech for Humanity meeting of G7 digital ministers, which France chairs.
Our plan, however, is to make sure that we try and build unity around this issue, that we, of course, maintain the principles of a free, open and secure internet, that this isn't about freedom of expression, this is about preventing violent extremism and terrorism online.
Christchurch shooting is the latest incident to shine a spotlight on how sites like Facebook, Twitter and YouTube struggle to address extremism on their platforms. While Facebook has promised to explore restriction on live streaming, experts and common men feel there is lots more that needs to be done. Arden says the regulation of online content challenge needs a global response.
There is no question that governments and leaders have their own roles to play here. And this is not about apportioning blame to any one element, for instance, or claiming that, for instance, we can resolve these issues simply by addressing what's happening on online platforms. Absolutely not. Our role, of course, is around social cohesion and around what we're doing to promote diversity and inclusion. So we can't, I think, step away from that responsibility, but nor can internet companies step away from theirs as well.
Tackling online extremism is challenged with massive proportions. This can be gauged by the fact that nearly 6 weeks after the Christchurch massacre, social media sites are still struggling to stamp out copies of the gunman's video. The organizers of the meeting in Paris say no one wishes to see violent extremism and terrorism online. So we have a starting point, that is one of unity. It is time for action. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's it from me in today's episode. I'll see you next week with all the international news stories in yet another edition of World Panorama. See you then. Bye-bye.